Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our session today. I'm here with a couple of my colleagues. My name is Kristen Molyneaux. I am the Vice President of Lever for Change, and I am joined by Anita Anastacio, who's going to introduce herself quickly.
Hi, everyone, and this is Anita Anastacio. I also welcome everyone here to this last day and this session around creating partnerships. I'm the director for our humanitarian portfolio that focuses on early childhood education and development in humanitarian settings. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm with the LEGO Foundation. And I'm handing over to Muhsin.
Great. Thanks, Anita. Thank you, Kristen. Good morning and good evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. Really looking forward to this session and learning together today. My name is Muhsin Hassan. I am an awards director at Lever for Change.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to kick off our presentation on creating partnerships around refugee responses. We're gonna go to the next slide. I'm gonna give you a quick overview of what we're gonna cover today, which is we are going to first give you a little sense of what each of our organizations do and who we are essentially as an organization. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about MacArthur Foundation's 100 and Change competition, which is a $100 million grant competition. From there, we're going to talk about LEGO Foundation and LEGO Foundation's work in the humanitarian space and how LEGO Foundation and MacArthur have been partnering in the last several years around early childhood development and support in the humanitarian space in the Syrian response region. And then we're going to discuss another competition that Lever for Change has been managing and working with that is focused again on refugee responses. And then we'll open it up for a question and answer. So we do have a few polls for you, and I believe Maggie will be putting some information for you on how to access those polls into the chat box. We're going to use those at the end of the presentation to kind of get a sense of what people might want to hear a little bit more about once we get to that question and answer section of the presentation. And we are going to go ahead and kick off the session. Please feel free to write any questions you have in the chat box. We'll be monitoring those, and when we get to the end of the presentation portion, we will use that as kind of the next phase of our Q&A and make sure to try and get to everybody's questions. So I'm going to kick off and give a little bit of background as to what Lever for Change is. If we can go to that next slide. Lever for Change is an affiliate of the MacArthur Foundation, and we were born out of the success of MacArthur's 100 and Change competition, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more after we finish our introductions. The mission of Lever for Change is to unlock significant capital and to help donors find and fund solutions to some of the world's biggest challenges. In particular, we work with a lot of donors and family foundations who may not have a large staff or who need additional support on vetting and doing the due diligence on organizations and or just sourcing organizations outside of their current network. So particularly for donors and foundations who have a little bit of smaller staff sizes, we work with those organizations to really do a lot of that back office support. We take a three-pronged approach to helping donors source organizations. So one thing that we do is we run customized competitions for donors. These competitions can be focused on any area or topic of interest that particular donor might have. During the competition process, we work really hard to raise the visibility of all of the organizations that rose to the top of that particular competition in order to catalyze additional funding, not just for the organization who might ultimately win the award, but for the other finalists and other top performing organizations in the competition. And then the third piece that we do is we match donors who maybe don't want to spend time running a competition or want to move capital more quickly. We have this entire database of vetted organizations that we've worked with, that we know what their work is, where we can work to match those donors to organizations that are within their particular area of interest. So we take this three-prong approach to both piggyback on all the work that organizations have done to participate in a competition, as well as all of the work that we've done doing vetting and due diligence of those organizations to try and move capital more quickly for donors who are looking to make those types of investments. investments. So that is what Lever for Change does. And I'll talk a little bit more about the genesis of of Lever for Change out of 100 and Change in a little bit, as will my colleague Muhsin when we get to that portion of the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Anita now to talk a little bit about Lego Foundation. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can we go to the slide 1B4, please? Thank you. Yeah, so a little bit about the Lego Foundation. It's a Danish corporate foundation headquartered in Denmark with office locations in Boston, Mexico, South Africa, and the Ukraine. What's really interesting about the foundation is that it owns 25% of the Lego group, the famous Lego sets that you can buy and the toys. And it's a family foundation, a family owned business of the Christensen's family. The ownership is now in the third generation of the family, and our fourth generation CEO, Thomas Christensen, is also the chairman of the Lego Foundation's board. Our mission, as you can see, is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. And it's a mission that we share with the Lego Group. And the aim that we have is to redefine play and reimagining learning and showing the world that the transformative power of play, so that every child and adult can find or rediscover that learning, rediscover the ability to play and its value through its life. We believe that playfully learning is helping children develop skills needed to navigate the uncertain and complex world we are finding ourselves in. And we also believe that play is one of the most important aspects of children's upbringing, and that from the early years through adolescence and into adulthood, play nurtures and develops the breadth of skills that enable us to be powerful agents of our own lives and positive contributions to our communities. We typically fund partners that are aligned with our mission, that are focused on supporting and looking at how we can reach children with playful learning. And that also are really focused on ensuring that in whatever ways we do that, and our partners are doing it, that we are that children are acquiring the right skills. And we do that through changing behaviors and mindsets in parents, caregivers, teachers, and the systems, governments that enable playful learning for children. We identify and support programs that demonstrate results. We also try and fund work that builds and generates the evidence to show the value of playful learning, but more importantly, the value shows that children have actually achieved outcomes. And we help open minds to develop the buy-in. Next slide. We work in more than 30 countries now, and I think every day it's kind of like, or every month, it looks like we are opening into another context. And we, in some of our countries like South Africa, Mexico, the Ukraine, and Denmark, we are looking at the full ecosystem and trying to influence the full ecosystem. And in some of our other countries, it may be a focus on early childhood development. It may be a focus on investing in smaller communities. And in some, it's investing in the whole system in and of itself, the education system, for example. And our partners are a range of NGOs, whether local or international. We also fund the United Nations, UNICEF, and others. We also invest at times into pooled funding mechanisms. And we do fund research institutions, think tanks, and advocacy organizations. And I hand it over to Kristen, back to you.
Great, thanks. So we're going to go to the next slide and start talking about our partnership journey. We have been partnering with LEGO Foundation actually for the last couple of years, but the journey that led to that starts before that with our 100 and Change competition. So if we can go to the next slide. In 2016, MacArthur announced its first $100 million challenge to solve a critical problem of our time. And we often get asked the question, why $100 million? Why a competition? This particular competition is an open competition sourcing any problem, any ideas, any solutions anywhere in the world. So there was no geography preference, there was no solution or problem preference. We really led with kind of an initial idea of we want to learn what's out there. And we often get asked why do that? Part of the reason we decided to take this approach was we wanted to recognize that we had a limited knowledge of what problems might be solvable in the world or where we could make a significant impact with our resources. We also wanted to address the criticism that is often leveled against traditional philanthropy, which is that foundations often set a strategy, it's done in a black box. Program officers and directors and program staff go out and decide what that strategy is going to be, and then they look for organizations that can have impact within that particular strategy, right? So it's very foundation focused as opposed to where the need might actually be. So we wanted to kind of challenge that notion and turn that on its head. The other thing that we wanted to challenge was the idea that giving small grants over short periods of time could really have any type of meaningful impact. And we thought, what would happen if we gave a very large grant over a longer period of time? Would that allow the organizations to have a different way of solving problems, to have more impact over time and have more runway to actually see that impact in action? So that was part of the impetus for creating 100 and Change. So it was really an experiment that the foundation embarked on. Some of the key tenets of 100 and Change is that we wanted to be open to learning what problems and solutions might surface out in the world and what we were missing within our traditional grant making processes. We wanted to transfer the agency for defining what those problems are and what the solutions could be to the actual organizations, people, local and global problem solvers that were working every single day to try and change the world in whatever way that they were trying to have meaningful impact. So that's why we asked organizations, what is the problem you are trying to solve and what is the solution you are bringing to the table, rather than dictating what that should be. We also wanted to mobilize expertise from outside the foundation. So often foundation staff can act as gatekeepers, not necessarily purposefully, but because you're always getting requests for funding, and that just tends to mean that you have to draw limitations and lines in the sand in terms of how many people you can have conversations with, et cetera. But that often means that you are missing organizations that are maybe doing really incredible work because they're not within your network or your orbit, or you haven't come in contact with them. So by using expertise from outside the foundation, including a panel of experts from all over the world in different areas of expertise, allowed us to surface things that were of interest, that had evidence behind them, that were meaningful in ways that we might not have been able to do with just a small staff. The other piece was we really wanted to elevate the best ideas in recognition that we could increase public awareness of what people were doing out there and to inspire other people to act and to act big. And that was actually what happened with LEGO Foundation, and part of the reason that we're here today to discuss that partnership. So if we go to the next slide, on December 20th of 2017, the MacArthur Foundation announced the inaugural recipient of our 100 and Change $100 million grant. So this grant was awarded to the Sesame Workshop and to the International Rescue Committee for their work that was focused on supporting the most vulnerable refugees in the Syrian in crisis settings, specifically in the Syrian response region for this particular project. And part of the reason MacArthur chose this organization or this partnership to fund was because we really wanted to shine a spotlight on this very underfunded and under-resourced area. Less than 2% of humanitarian response aid goes to education. And I think at the time when we made this award, it was less than 0.1% of that funding went to actual early childhood development or young children, the 0 to 8-year-old range, right? Those kids that are not yet in school, so they're not receiving any education support. They were kind of falling through the cracks, and we really wanted to shine a light on this area to raise the visibility of this particular issue and to help bring other funders into this space in order to support this work. So before we talk a little bit more about the partnership, I wanted to first play a video that will give you a sense of what it is that Ahlan Simsim, which is the program that Sesame Workshop and IRC created, what Ahlan Simsim looks like and what it's doing in the Syrian response region. So if we can go ahead and play the video now.
In 2018, production began on a new children's show from Sesame Workshop, meant to address an urgent need facing children throughout the Middle East. Over the last decade, 12 million people from Syria have been displaced. Over half are children. And for them, the trauma of war and displacement can have lifelong effects. In response to this crisis, Sesame Workshop launched a program with the International Rescue Committee to bring early learning to millions of children, from refugee and host communities alike.
Ahlan Simsim is the name of the new series. It's in New Sesame Street.
We wanted to do was to bring our expertise to address the crisis that children living in the Syrian response region were experiencing.
We brought creatives from the region together to create inspiring characters children can relate to. Basma is a bold, adventurous girl Muppet who loves to sing and dance. Her best friend Jad, who's new to the neighborhood, expresses himself through art. And Mezouza is a mischievous goat who follows them everywhere.
عالم أهلا سمسم هو عالم مليء بالفرح والضحك والصداقة والبراءة والطفولة والمحبة.
Education experts developed the curriculum for the show.
The children, they don't know what verbs to use to describe what they are feeling.
We were talking about the vocabulary of emotions, the ABCs of the emotions.
After learning that children in the region need help managing big feelings,
So scared.
He gets frustrated.
the team weaves coping strategies into the show's songs and storylines. The IRC is using the show along with other Ahlan Simsim materials in direct services and in-person learning to complete a circle of care around the most vulnerable families.
كل حدا اشتغل في هذا البرنامج حط قلبه في هذا الإشي يعني بتمنى يضحكوا ويستفيدوا ويتعلموا سواء كانوا كبار أو صغار.
Ahlan Simsim is bringing joy, laughter, and playful learning to a generation of children, helping to build the resilience they need to thrive now and far into the future.
Great, thank you. So that's an overview of Sesame's work in Ahlan Simsim. This programming and all the educational resources that they've created through this program also flow into direct services that IRC provides, particularly to very vulnerable families who have been displaced by the refugee crisis and are now living in Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, or in displaced communities within Syria. So it's a holistic program that really supports families at multiple levels. So we are going to talk a little bit about why did MacArthur select this project. Given that this was a crisis setting and we knew that things would likely change, I think, as I talked about before, one of the main reasons MacArthur was excited about this project was that it could really shine a spotlight on an underfunded, under-resourced area that was a real critical need. The other piece of this was that we knew that this was going to be a potentially challenging situation to be working in, but we went into it knowing we need to be flexible, we need to trust our grantee, we need to allow them to pivot and adapt as the crisis continued to shift. And so we really wanted to focus on how could they build partnerships with governments and with other implementers at scale, and how could they create a model that could be adapted in different settings. So being able to allow them to be flexible, to learn, to adapt as they continue that process so that they could learn what could be actually scaled in different crisis settings, what would work globally versus what is a very specific regional issue that had to be dealt with in a very specific way because of the context, was part of the reason that we also funded this. Is we had a hope that this early childhood work could start to seep into other humanitarian responses prior to them, prior to that humanitarian response happening, so that those organizations, UNHCR or IRC or Save the Children, these other large institutions that are at the front lines often responding to humanitarian crises, are thinking about early childhood from the very beginning when they start to respond to a crisis. So those were some of the big reasons that we wanted to fund it. Another piece was that we wanted to build the body of knowledge. So this grant, this $100 million grant that we made, in effect, will be doubling the amount of research that is out there on early childhood in crisis settings. So the amount of research is very slim in terms of what is known about how to best support children and the effects of crises on these small children. And so having this research was actually going to double the body of knowledge that we currently have. So it was an opportunity to both shine a spotlight, really have input into the knowledge that's out there and create new knowledge of a rigorous nature, and also to help build partnerships in order to build in early childhood into the way we respond to crisis settings. So we funded $100 million to Sesame. We knew it was risky given the context and the challenges of working in a humanitarian setting. And we hoped that we would bring other donors along and get them excited about this work. And in only a few short months, it's exactly what happened. So we received a call from the Lego Foundation saying, hey, we're really excited about what you do. We've been wanting to work in the humanitarian setting for some time, but didn't quite know how to best jump in. And we're going to follow your lead, and we're going to match your $100 million commitment to fund Sesame in this humanitarian work, and to also take the learnings and the model that they are creating and adapt it and implement it in Bangladesh for the Rohingya crisis. So it was very exciting for us because we had no expectation, or we had no idea of just how successful we might be with shining a light on this particular topic. And within a few short months, we realized, wow, we have something here in terms of our ability to really raise the visibility of this type of a problem. So I'm going to turn it over now to Anita to talk about Lego Foundation and why they decided to get involved in this, and talk a little bit more about our partnership.
Yeah, thank you. And we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. And the next slide. Thank you. And I'll let the audience read a little bit, but just to say, I think as Kristen already mentioned, we called up MacArthur Foundation, and very similarly, our board has been thinking a lot about how to enter the humanitarian space, and in what ways, whether we should start with entering the education system, the early childhood arena, etc. And I think the investment that MacArthur made to Sesame and the International Rescue Committee sort of helped really to spark the idea. Yes, we knew that we needed to do a lot more in the a lot more for very young children, as Kristen said. Funding for these programs servicing children below 5 often really focuses only on survival and not necessarily also for children to thrive, or what they need to thrive, to develop healthy relationship, and to learn early and set them up for the entry into further learning and getting them into development. So for us, it was it really spoke to us to kind of join this funding and this movement on really shining a spotlight. And I think we've since done so with this first investment that we made to Sesame Workshop, and one of the largest NGOs in the world, the BRAC and the IRC. And we went to invest in both the Middle East and in Bangladesh to look at the Rohingya crisis and to invest in young children's holistic development. A lot of this has to do also that much of the work we are doing, and we've since grown, and you'll see it, I will show you a little bit more on what we've been doing in the meantime, in addition to that $100 million investment. But what you can see is like deepening the work around learning through play in the Syrian response, and also to really add to the evidence. I think Kristen already alerted to this. There is so little evidence around what works for young children's development, holistic development, holistic learning outcomes. And we wanted to make sure that our funding also helps really strengthen that evidence base. And then again, very much in line with MacArthur, continue to shine a light and continue to raise the importance of young children's development. We know from the science of brain development that it's really critical that the early years need to have strong relationship with caregivers, build necessarily skills early on because it's the best period for young children to learn. So we wanted to make sure that that becomes part and parcel a response to children affected by disasters, conflict, and crisis. So since then, and we can go to the next slide, we've been investing in, as you can see, some of the organizations that you can see here. We have invested quite a bit, but also a lot of work goes into building the right coalitions and alliances, because we know that we can't do this work on our own, or the $200 million investments into early childhood that both MacArthur and us made isn't enough, will not be enough. It's still not enough to really respond to children affected by crisis, because that crisis, I think we now know over 75 million children are still living in these contexts and don't have the right way. So one of the investments one of the ways we've been engaging is with the Moving Minds Alliance that you see here. That is an alliance dedicated to young children's holistic development, to the needs that to really investing in the ecosystem of young children, the parents, the caregivers, the social workers, the health workers, and so on and so forth. And we've been working very closely with other funders. It started out as a funders alliance, like-minded funders, private sector foundations that had come together. And we have since expanded it to also bring in the partners that we typically fund, university academics, to work with us and to bring, to sort of really create a movement to raise the issue of young children in humanitarian settings that are often left out. MacArthur is one of the foundations that are part of it, and there are a couple of others. And we are really going out and working with bilateral donors, multilateral donors, the humanitarian response in and of itself, in terms of how it's organized, influencing how humanitarian response plans like the ones in Haiti or Afghanistan now are funded. So that's some of the work that we are also doing within the initiative, for example, that I'm leading, again, to raise the importance of young children. And it's another way of how you can see how creating partnerships are a really important solution to refugee responses. I'm now handing over to the next slide. We are talking now. Muhsin, will you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Anita and Kristen. We can move to the next slide. So yeah, I think in this section, you've heard about the birth of Leva for Change, and how we came to be in terms of the success of 100 and Change, and MacArthur's really pioneering decision to run this large competition at this huge level. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about one of the competitions, as Kristen mentioned, Leva for Change decided that from the success of 100 and Change, we saw that there was actually an appetite in the field really for this type of approach. Kristen talked about how parts of the approach or the model of the competition model are really meant to demystify aspects of philanthropy that we're trying to level the playing field in certain ways, really give a fair shot in a way to smaller, maybe unknown organizations that might not have the reputations of the larger, more established entities that we all kind of work with more typically. So an example of that is the Larsen Lam Iconic Impact Award. So I'll just kind of give a brief overview here as to how this competition came to be and how we actually managed to engage other partners. I saw a question around bringing in other partners and what have you. So and you'll see that this was really a great example of an initiative that was beyond just MacArthur or Leva for Change. So in January of 2019, we launched the Larsen Lam Iconic Impact Award. From the name of the challenge, you'll notice that it was initially sponsored, or still sponsored by Chris Larsen and Lena Lam. And this was a very personal decision for them. Chris and Lena, are a couple who live in the West Coast. But the important thing here is that Lena was actually resettled to the U.S. as a refugee from Cambodia herself. So throughout time, they've always cared as a family about refugee issues. And in that time, especially given what was going on, globally, really with more nationalist or inward-looking policies, the rhetoric, especially in the U.S., was very much anti-refugee and anti-immigration. They felt that they wanted to do something game-changing. So very much in line with this idea of 100 and Change and Leva for Change, which is sponsoring competitions and enabling philanthropists who want to make big bets and bold bets really to uncover some of these groundbreaking strategies and solutions, foster partnerships that you might not really see in the space, to really do something game changing. And in this particular case, the goal was to really try to source and uncover innovative, scale-ready solutions that really tried to support the well-being of refugees all over the world, but also really get at securing a durable future for them. So, really moving outside of the more emergency type of support, which is really on, humanitarian response and relief, but really looking at that long-term, durability. How can we actually work, with refugees, as we know, right? Talented communities that are very resourceful, very resilient. How can we work with them? Or with folks who are working in this sector to really secure that durable future for them. So that was really the impetus of the competition. And when we started and launched, it was actually a $10 million competition. That tends to be kind of the minimum for a lot of Leva for Change competitions, because again, in line with making big bets, we're encouraging philanthropists to really devote or commit significant philanthropic capital. The upside of that is also that not only are we channeling more resources to a lot of these issue areas that we're all trying to address, but also it in many ways incentivizes the stakeholders working on the solution side of things to really think big and think outside the box. So, right, I mean, it flows, obviously, logically. If, we're putting out an RFP for $100,000, that's the type of response you'll get will be, commensurate with that or adequate to that. So the idea here is also to spur stakeholders in the field to think bigger, think outside the box, both in terms of the scale, but also in how they're also working together and the partnerships that they're bringing to bear. So, we launched in January. We had a 4-month period where folks that were, working on their applications, submitting their ideas. But throughout that time period, Lever for Change was also embarking on, this kind of partnership building. So going to the question that we've seen, reaching out to donors and philanthropists whom we know care about this issue. So, identifying and having a lot of conversations with folks who are, already funders in the space to really get them excited about this competition and why, we thought this had the potential to actually do something significant. And, again, as you all know, these processes usually take a long time. But, we were so excited that by the end of the process, which was, earlier this year, or actually late last year, sorry, the 2021 and 2020 is just a blur. But, we actually were able to more than double the competition commitment. So we went from being a $10 million competition that was going to award, one grant to the kind of the recipient out of the 5 finalists that we had, to having $26.25 million raised by the end of it. And we had all finalists funded, each at least got $1.25 million, and 2 of the top among the finalists actually ended up getting $12 million. And you can see kind of from this slide that, in addition to Kristen, Lena, we had, a couple other, donors come in and chip in at all levels, really, right? We had a commitment from, one donor in the Iconic Impact Committee that at $11 million, which is significant, and then also had, $1.25 million from David Karp and Samantha McManus, for example. Last but not least, again, in kind of in the same vein of talking and engaging other partners, we actually got the Hilton Foundation to also come on board, and they chipped in with an additional $2 million that went to the recipient of the Larson Lam Iconic Impact Award. So, this is just an example here of, a competition that was focused on refugee response, but through kind of the Lever for Change model, which is very deliberately focused on engaging, a multitude of partners, really. We were able to kind of build on that momentum, both from 100 and Change and other previous competitions that we had already run at Lever for Change, to really get this serious, commitment that at the end of it, we could say we had $26.25 million, right? That's a significant amount. From kind of previous experience, we all know that, it's very rare for people in this space to say that we're able to disperse $26 million in a matter of 16 months, right? Usually this is the what you achieve over 5 years, right? If you're just a regular program at a foundation or in other philanthropic institution. So this was just an example here of how we were able to kind of use this competition model to really get folks excited through this new model, and actually get people to commit that significant philanthropic capital that has really been the objective and is the objective of all of us in this space. And later on we'll talk about kind of how and some tips around how we're able to do that, but we can just move on to the next slide. I'll just touch on here briefly. One thing that really allowed us to do that was the diversity of applicants and proposals and solutions that we got. So from this slide here, you can see we got a total of 72 applications, which tends to be, compared to other competitions that are international. For example, we've gotten 1,000. If Kristen talks about the numbers around 100 and change, we might get scared. So we got 72, but really high quality applications. But the great thing about it was that, we had the lead applicants. A lot of these applications actually were, teams that had come together. So 2 or more, in some cases, 5 different organizations. So in the case of the recipient, actually, you had 5 different organizations form a coalition. That was a refugee-led coalition to work in, Indonesia with Afghan refugees, to work in Syria and Lebanon with Syrian refugees, to work in Uganda with refugees from South Sudan and DRC, as well as in Colombia, working with Venezuelan refugees. So a really great coalition, all small, really scrappy, small but mighty organizations founded by refugees themselves. And really, an innovative approach. So I think we've shared a resource around kind of the finalists. So I urge you to take a look at that, or just visit the website, LarsonLam.IconicImpactAward.org, and you can learn more about, our finalists there, all excellent organizations. But yeah, I just wanted to share this slide here very quickly to show, this really also helped us kind of generate those partnerships, right? So for example, in the case of Hilton, we were able to just pull some of the top solutions that actually worked in geographies that we know are priority areas for them, right? So having, this model that, going back to Kristen's point around really allowing the people who are working on these issues to actually tell us what the problem is, rather than being, kind of the typical foundation approach, which would be, level for change, setting a strategy and saying, oh, we're only focused on, let's say, Eastern Africa and the Middle East, right? This type of approach really allows folks to make a case for where they're working and what they're working on actually matters, and how we can actually make a difference. And since, the goal is really the same for all of us, which is that, to secure a durable future for refugees, we're able to get this really cool database of amazing organizations. And then through our connections as folks in this space, as donors or donor entities, talk to other partners who we know might be limited in their scope or restricted, for valid reasons, and then just facilitate that exchange, right? And actually get people funded. So, that was just a really great, result that we got from this competition, and something that we continue to build on, and hope that, is attractive, and honestly offers some lessons also for all of us in this sector to be able to kind of build on and continue to kind of just, build on that momentum and achieve even greater impact. So yeah, I'll stop here. We can move on to the next slide, which is just, again, to my previous point around takeaways, right? So obviously, this is all great, but I imagine, a couple of you are wondering, how, or what are some lessons that, you might have, or we might have for you all, in terms of how are we able to successfully create this partnership? So in the case of 100 and change, right, going from 100 million to 200 and 300 later on. In the case of the Larson Lam Award, going from 10 million to 26.25 million. One key thing I would just say is that, it matters, or it's very important to be deliberate in your design process. And by that, we mean, be deliberate in allowing or providing opportunities for collaboration between donors. So I think that flexibility, given especially, the focus areas that we're working in, especially in this case, fragile settings, we all know you need that flexibility. But I think sometimes, the way we design things might not really allow for that. So that's one thing that we really focused on in this case, and, focused on looking at designing a competition that obviously touched on the key parameters that, we had discussed with our donors and knew this is what mattered to them, but also designing it in such a way that still allowed flexibility for others to join, for others who might not necessarily have the exact same objectives, but related objectives, right? So for example, as you saw in the case of Hilton, it was really at the end of the competition that we said, look, we got some really great proposals, and from the conversations we've had with you, we know that, you guys are focused on these parts of the world, and we would love for you to see some of this, the materials that we have. And then we're able to have those conversations, and, they actually led to folks getting funded, which is all, at Level for Change, all we want, right? We're just happy to get money out the door, regardless of who's providing it. So that's just one lesson I would like to share here. The other point is just looking also at, the fact that in terms of, foundations capacity, in terms of track record, due diligence, right, stakeholder relationships, these kind of advantages that we have really help offset risks that other donors, especially high net worth individuals, usually face in funding organizations, especially in refugee settings. We can have a separate conversation around how we think about risk, and where it's whether that's a fair assessment in terms of risk in refugee context. But we all know when it comes to this space, the way we kind of think about risk is a bit more amplified, right, or exaggerated, whatever term you want to pick or choose. So this is one thing that we saw was actually an advantage, because at Level for Change, we had worked on, with these organizations, especially in the case of finalists, right? Over 7 months, we had done a lot of due diligence. We really knew these organizations intimately, knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and what they could help. They could use help working on and improving. And just having and being able to share that information with a lot of organizations or donors who we knew might not have had that capacity to do that work, that legwork on their own, really helped. Right. So in the case of, David and Samantha, in the case of the iconic donors, for example, even C-grade, right, we were able to just share a lot of that information and say, hey, we've done all this work. We're happy to have these conversations. We can really vouch for these organizations because we have this relationship and this kind of resource in terms of data and insights that we can offer to you all. So, right, that's something that, we also think is a great lesson that, we continue to build on Level for Change. So just, want to drive that point home, having that openness and transparency in how we just share information and kind of, help facilitate giving, in this space, especially to donors who might not have that capacity to do this work themselves. So yeah, I'll stop here for, the first couple takeaways, and then I'll let Anita kind of take us through the others.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe we go back to the slide, just to say that we're just maybe piggybacking onto what Muhsin was just saying about the foundation's capacity. I think track record, due diligence, I think very much so for us. We did have a good partnership already. We've been working with Sesame Workshop for a long time. Nevertheless, I think we also were quite impressed by the process that Level for Change or 100 and Change went through. And, it wasn't done in a month or a year or so. There was quite a bit of process by which finalists went through due diligence, working and so on. And so for us, it was actually a really nice opportunity to just say, okay, we know that that MacArthur has done a lot of work prior to giving the $100 million out. So for us to, we aligned with really with the focus on early childhood development in these settings. We wanted to do something. So also a takeaway to sort of say we can piggyback on other foundations' due diligence processes, and we can also, I think, partnerships are great when you are aligning around interest, even around shared interests. Some of our foundation colleagues might be more interested in the health sector. We are more interested in the education sector, and we can come together and also provide that opportunity. So I think I'll leave it with that as a takeaway, and maybe just ending. I also think that there is the opportunity of thinking about, particularly in refugee responses and the various settings. Sometimes it's like Muhsin was saying, it's an immediate response, but very often we know that refugees on average, stay 10 or more years in a particular place. So sometimes it's also depending on the context to kind of think, do I have in my portfolio some, a mixed bag of things, right? Like some are safer bets because these are more stable context versus in other places, it's like, okay, I have to do something. I'm really not sure if it will bring something, but it's the right thing to do. And refugees have the right to a response. So it's also sort of like considering to have safer bets or a portfolio that is a bit of a mix of high risk and low risk. Yeah, and I think with that, do we open it up for discussion?
I think so.
Everyone?
So I think there was a couple of questions already that have come in. One was about evaluating partnerships. And I can kind of kick us off and then maybe turn it over to Muhsin and Anita for their thoughts as well. As Anita said, and I didn't go into a lot of specifics about our process, and neither did Muhsin, but with 100 and change and with Lever for Change process in general, we use multiple levels of vetting. So the vetting starts with actually applicant to applicant review, where applicants within the competition review each other and provide feedback. Then that moves to an external evaluation panel that is experts. Those are all online and available, and we're very open and transparent about who will be reviewing each proposal. Every proposal is reviewed by 5 reviewers who provide not only a score based on the criteria that has been published beforehand and is available online as well, so organization knows how they will be evaluated, but they get those scores as well as qualitative feedback on what's exciting about their proposal, where they feel there might be gaps in the proposal. We then move on to usually technical reviews, diversity, equity, inclusion reviews. So at each level of our process, it becomes more rigorous in terms of vetting. And within that vetting process, or after organizations are selected as finalists, they also work with technical assistance providers for anywhere from 3 to 6 to 8 months or more, depending on the competition timeline. And during that time, those technical assistance providers are working with the organizations to help them build out very robust implementation plans and strategy plans, evaluation plans, and work with them on supporting partnership. So to Anita's point, it's not a fast process. Doing a competition is not a fast process. The support and capacity building that we provide organizations is not a fast process either. But the idea is to really support organizations to strengthen their partnerships, to maybe find gaps where their partnership is. I think the other important thing to remember is that it's very difficult to partner with other organizations. Partnerships take time to both develop and to solidify. They are constant negotiations. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is watching Sesame Workshop and IRC work together, watching them also partner with other organizations in the field, whether they're advocacy organizations like the United Nations or whether they're the ministries of education in Jordan and Lebanon, is that it takes time. And one of the big takeaways that I have really come to appreciate is that giving organizations runway, 3 to 5 years or more to do their work, really can transform what they're able to do, because they can be in the space longer. They can become a trusted partner, both for governments and other types of agencies. They can continue to build and grow their partnership and build levels of trust with one another, because they have funding, so they can hire people that allow them to kind of continue to build that partnership and pay attention to the partnership. But they have the time and the space to continue to learn together, to pivot, to adapt. And that's something that you don't get when you're making a $250,000 grant over 3 years to an organization. So I think really thinking about the length of grants and how long you're supporting those organizations, and not expecting that they're going to be perfect the entire time, whether it's a crisis situation or a non-crisis situation, a safe bet or quote unquote riskier bet. Organizations are going to have learning moments, and those might look like quote unquote failures, but at the same time, those are opportunities for real growth and to bring those learnings back to the field in terms of what works and what doesn't. So I would say the biggest takeaway from our vetting process is that with Lever for Change, while we are trying to vet the programs and understand the projects and put together strong implementation plans, we're not doing gotcha type vetting. Oh, you didn't answer this question correctly, so you're no longer eligible. Or, oh, your organization has, this challenge that it's facing, therefore we're not going to, continue to work with you or provide grant money to you. We really take it as an opportunity to say, what are the challenges this organization has in order to be more impactful, and how can we support them to move through that challenge or to improve their system so that they can be more impactful. So I'll stop there, and I don't know if Muhsin or Anita, you have a different take or a different lens you want to bring to that.
Yeah, I would just echo what Kristen is saying. I think process very similar to probably how Lever for Change or 100 and Change or MacArthur Foundation in general looks at evaluating and assessing partners for their readiness, right? I think we have done also internal processes and internal assessments of really understanding the sector a bit more, refugee responses, who works there. We have conducted interviews initially when we were really thinking about how to enter this space, because the Lego Foundation wasn't necessarily was more risk averse, and so this is taking a huge risk, and so we've done a lot of initial work, really understanding the sector a little bit better. We also brought people into the space that have worked in the space, right? And we brought them to the foundation, and that has also helped. They had previous networks, past networks of organizations they would work with, alliances, etc. So I think that also has helped establish also understanding who is working in this space and what's the reputation of those partners, and so on and so forth. So I would say that's also a part of how, for example, we would assess and evaluate partners before we give them funding. I also see that some of the poll results have come in, right? And again, I think in regards to what grant seekers were saying, I think it speaks to the answer that you've just given, Kristen. The short grant cycles are really barriers, right? And I've also seen this with the $100 million that we have given to Bangladesh and to the Syrian crisis. And really, I think what's nice about a foundation is that we can also be flexible. We are not trying to there is accountability, of course. We want to make sure that our partners are accountable. However, we also realize that in these contexts, we often need to pivot, or partners need to pivot. We've seen it with COVID, right? And I think the ability to be flexible, the ability to be adjusting has also helped, I think, for partners to feel that they can experiment a little bit, because that's what's needed as well, right? We don't have a lot of interventions, for example, in the early childhood space that we know that have been tested, that we know that work, and so on. So trying to try out and test, that's part of the funding that we've made accessible to our partners, to really try, experiment, fail, try again, right? But serve children in the meantime as well. And it's not like, it's just kind of like, how can you adjust the needle a bit and such? But I think that has helped as well, having these partnerships as well. I think with alliances like the Moving Minds Alliance or Elevate Children or so, right? There are alliances that funders can join if they have, like, for example, a shared interest and can really see how we, what makes sense, how we can share resources better, how we can learn together. The Moving Minds Alliance is not just an alliance, for example, that is advocating for more prioritization of early childhood in the sector, but also as funders, it was really intentionally built to share learning, to share knowledge, and in some ways also to understand better who our partners are in the space, right? Who works well, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
I see there are also other questions. One was also relating to just suggestions for how donors can share due diligence and equivalency determination. So I'll just take a first stab here. I think this actually piggybacks very well on Anita's point, which is, you do have some of these resources in the sector. So, for example, the Moving Mind Alliance, right? That's an avenue through which donors who are part of this kind of movement or coalition can actually, then becomes easier to share some of these resources. One thing that at Level for Change we try to do is through, our Bold Solutions Network. And I think, Kristen mentioned this earlier. One thing that, we try to do is say, look, yes, we might have these competitions that have maybe come to their conclusion, but that's not really the end of the journey. And we continue to want to engage other donors who want to come in at different funding levels, right? Not everybody's going to come in at 10 million. So that's part of it. So already kind of putting out that we do have this information and we're more than happy to share. We found that to be just a huge kind of game changer, because a lot of people just assume that, oh, this is confidential information, which, in the case that it is, we do want to, respect the privacy of a lot of these organizations that we work with. So, a simple tool that we use is just very simple kind of NDAs, where we just kind of, have an NDA whenever we're sharing, sensitive information. We obviously notify the grant organization. So, everybody is aware of what is being shared, and, gives their okay. And, we found that a lot of grant seekers, especially when it comes to, conversations where that might potentially lead to them having even more funding, people are much more open about sharing when it comes to, such scenarios. So I think these are just very kind of quick, I would say, examples I would offer. But yeah, please chime in, Anita and Kristen.
Yeah, I think a big takeaway is you don't have to do it on your own, right? There are foundations out there, and Lever for Change in particular, we are, I think, trying to push the field a bit, and how do we best share this information. It's really unfortunate that every time an organization might go to a new grant-seeking organization or grant funding organization, they have to recreate the wheel in terms of turning in all their paperwork and getting their equivalency and the due diligence process again. And that both puts a burden on the organization itself that may have already just gone through that with another funder 2 months ago. But it also puts pressure on program staff, right? Because they're constantly recreating the wheel with stuff that they could probably get from their peers at other funding institutions. And so part of what we're trying to do at Lever for Change is leapfrog that process a bit, recognizing, yes, we can share the proposal with Hilton Foundation. We can share some of the due diligence we've done. They might still choose to go out and do additional due diligence, but in the end, we're hoping that can leapfrog or speed up their process, right? They maybe don't have to do quite as much. They'll have a big packet of information that they can at least start from to say, oh, this looks like a good investment option for us. We might have some different questions we want to ask, but it's not recreating that wheel from the very beginning. And, so we often, to Muhsin's point, people are often surprised that we will share that kind of information, but we have a whole slew of information, including proposals, budgets, what I could do with $1 million versus what I could do with $5 million versus what we could do with $10 million, right? Because we recognize not everybody's going to be funding at the $10 million or above range, but these organizations can easily break their projects into smaller chunks for different levels of funding. And to go back to one of the partnership questions that we had earlier, one of the things that we've seen with the Sesame project, so yes, I skipped over this slide accidentally in my presentation, but yes, Lego Foundation came in and said, we're going to match your funding at $100 million level, which was incredible and nothing we could have ever anticipated. But the flip side of that is we've also had a lot of other donors who have come to the Ahlan Simsim program and funded at much smaller levels. So $500,000 grant from, I think it was $500,000 from GSMA, went to do some support on how to use mobile devices and how to use mobile messaging, particularly during COVID, to stay in touch with and support families, to send early childhood development messages to parents. And the whole idea of that project was COVID is providing us a different opportunity to reach families. Will mobile messaging work? What does that look like? What messages are the most useful or not useful? And so it was an additional piece to the project that hadn't been funded by either MacArthur or Lego. But that funding and that research actually will now help Sesame Workshop and IRC continue to pivot and adapt their messaging going forward because of the learnings that they had. So there's a lot of ways in which different levels of funding can come in and help build that partnership. And to Anita's point, having a platform like Moving Minds Alliance, or even just those conversations with other donors, allows you to find ways which you can plug in, even if you're not able to be at the $10 million level, right? There's a lot you can do with a lot less money, especially if you're taking a project that's already in existence, as opposed to kind of pushing organizations to create a whole new, brand new project just for your particular set of strategies. I don't know. I kind of went off track there, so I apologize. But and one of the things I did want to say is that the Sesame Workshop project has now actually between Sesame Workshop and IRC in terms of funding that is now flowing to the humanitarian space around early childhood development. It is about $208 million above and beyond the initial $100 million MacArthur investment. So it's a huge, huge influx of funding. $300+ million into early childhood response within 3 years is a pretty significant achievement in terms of how the funding community has rallied around this particular issue and the need to better think about how to support those most vulnerable of displaced peoples.
Yeah, and maybe there is another question here that we could probably dive into a little bit around the process scaling up, replicating successful projects, especially when we are moving across very different cultures and geographies, right? So is any one of you would like to take that question? If not, I can also go ahead.
Do you want to kick it off? Because you're funding that work, particularly from Syria response region to Bangladesh.
Yeah, so just to say, I think this is an important question because scaling a refugee response is difficult, challenging, often in contexts where when you think about host governments not really welcoming refugees, and then to think about how do you scale this up and what does scaling actually mean? And I think our partners, particularly in these in the Syrian response and in Bangladesh, have taken a really deliberate approach to kind of think about what is it we are scaling? Is it because we are doing a number of different interventions, some interventions that are happening in health centers, some interventions that are happening in protection spaces, some interventions that are happening in kindergartens, right? We are very lucky in the Syrian response in Lebanon and Jordan, where governments are actually quite open and have, not welcome, but have allowed Syrian refugees to come in and join schools and join centers and such. So it's kind of thinking about how do you do that, because there's already a government curriculum, there's a government approach and so on and so forth. So what can a partner or an agency like Sesame Workshop or the International Rescue Committee bring to the space? So it's more around the type of insights that are that maybe are not as well developed or not as well thought through. Children coming out of war and crisis may require a lot more counseling, a lot more, focus on psychosocial support, etc. So it's looking at are there particular insights that organizations can bring to government and influence this way? So that's how some of our grantees are looking at scaling. And there are different types of how we can scale, right? The other way is like, how do you replicate? And we've been doing some work now in with the IRC in Colombia. We've been looking at the Venezuelan response, and we've looked at which of the models do they have already that are, we know there's some evidence there that we can try and test. And we've asked the IRC, for example, to say, what if you were trying to test that in this Venezuelan context? That is not necessarily replicating the model, but it's taking, again, some insights, some particular things that are working. The approach of, for example, am I going to do a home visiting program versus how do I deal with families on the move? What's a better way of entry? However, what do I take from a curriculum that I've designed in Jordan and can integrate into work that I'm doing for Venezuelans who are moving from place to place, and how do I do this when there is a COVID crisis, etc. Right? And so that's how we've been looking at scale. And yes, we do want to scale, but we are also mindful that in these settings, we are dealing with host governments often that are not very open or bring in their own things and or have already systems created and such. So it's more around how can our organization influence that the particular needs of children affected by these crises are taken into consideration.
And I'll just add to that. I think there are two pieces. One is I'll go back to that partnership in the long runway with a longer grant. You know, scaling and getting government involved or other organizations involved takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of trust building. It takes a lot of negotiation. And I think, you know, often, you know, and I'll put myself in this bucket as a former program officer running a girls education program. You know, you don't often, when you get budgets or proposals from organizations, maybe push organizations to think more about who's going to do that advocacy work, who's really going to be the person that's leading that type of charge, because it often can't be the same people who are just doing the day-to-day program work, because it's just too much, right? And it really takes time. That needs to be funded. Those things need to be in projects. As donors, we need to recognize that that kind of advocacy work, although it might sound squishy and nebulous in a proposal, or it might not be clear exactly what that impact is, it's building those relationships and building that level of trust over time. And that's where I think that longer runway really comes into play. Recently, in a conversation with Sesame, they were talking about how they have worked with the Ministry of Education in Jordan to actually start distributing Ahlan content on the ministry's platforms. But that has taken years, both years before they even started Ahlan Simsim, but also the fact that they've been there now for 3 years doing this program. The government sees them as a trusted, valued partner. So those kinds of things I think are really important. And I know that for some donors, you can look at that and not be sure exactly what is the impact that I'm having here with this funding, or how does this connect, or I don't know, it's just funding somebody's salary to go out and do advocacy work. But it can be really, really critical to that long-term scaling or how you think about adapting it. Also with Sesame, they do a lot of research on what kind of content can be adapted and what makes sense in different contexts, right? So they don't just take everything and say, oh, we're just going to take this content that we built for the Middle East and transplant it to Colombia and just dub it into a new language. They really look at, and they've been very thoughtful the whole time that they've been building Ahlan Simsim, and I forget what the project is called in Bangladesh, Anita, I'm sorry. But they've looked at how can we build content that actually will merge across borders. So talking about being welcoming to children or building those kinds of friendships and what does it mean to be inclusive, those kinds of messages can translate across, you know, context. So not everything has to be super context specific. So they've been really thoughtful about what content is context specific versus how do we build content that could be adapted and used elsewhere with minimal effort, because it you know, the messaging isn't particularly context specific. It really it's going to resonate with all children or all families, because these are important, critical messages and emotions that children are experiencing. But I'll turn it to Muhsin. It looked like you wanted to jump in too.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I think from the Larsen Lam experience, I think I mentioned the recipient of the award was this coalition of 5 different organizations, the Resourcing Refugee Leadership Initiative. And what we also found, and this was already, again, actually something deliberately taken into account in the design of the process, was given how, you know, we all are talking about the refugee response, and we know kind of the similarities that of the challenges across the different contexts, but also highly, you know, kind of context specific issues that we have to take into account. One thing that we tried to do in the beginning was really, you know, emphasize placing resources in terms of both kind of the financial resources, but also decision-making power in the hands of, you know, those most proximate to these challenges. You know, so in the case of the Larsen Lam Impact Award, we saw that, you know, the team that rose to the top was one that really took into account one of the criteria that we had in the competition, which was community informed, right? And everybody will always talk about, oh yes, we are community informed, but, you know, really pushing that to the next level, right? So what does that really actually mean, right? Is it just kind of having a couple meetings with you know, organizing some workshops so we can kind of check that off a list that yes, we did have these community engagement or stakeholder workshops or whatever you want to call them, which again those are valuable and they matter, and we should continue to do them. But really kind of pushing the teams to take it to the next step, right? To what level are you actually engaging those most proximate to the challenges that we're facing? And that's one thing that we saw, that a lot of the top kind of solutions that we saw really put refugees themselves in the driving seat, where we were able to see that they had thought through a lot of the similarities. But then if you're thinking about this coalition I mentioned, right, thinking about the challenges that Venezuelan refugees are facing in Colombia and compare that to, Congolese refugees in Uganda, or, Afghan refugees in Indonesia, right? Very, very different. But, you had a coalition where these leaders came together, were actually thinking around, what are the similar situations that they're finding themselves in? What is different? And the fact that you had these people who are themselves refugees, right, who had, experienced these challenges and were actually very proximate and had these real, ties to these communities, it made it easier for them to just quickly pinpoint, where the adjustments might have to be made. Something that, for those of us who are not, in these contexts, would have taken, longer, to be honest. So I think that's one thing that, we found to be very, very helpful and very useful. And we know, right, we're all trying to fund refugees directly more, and we're all agreed on that. But one thing I would just urge ourselves as funders in this space is to really also allow for that to truly happen, and happen in a way that those most proximate actually have that decision-making power, and we're really placing them in the driver's seat to be able to really shape a lot of these solutions, rather than simply having them as, folks who we consult simply, or just are adjacent to kind of the solutions that we're driving forward. So yeah, that's kind of what I would just share here in terms of a lesson that we've seen that has worked really well.
I think we are at time for our panel. So I want to thank everybody for coming. All of us are available for additional conversation should you want to speak with us. There are lots of different opportunities to partner with us. So whether that's partnering with Lego Foundation and MacArthur through the Moving Minds Alliance, or just separately in conversation, we're happy to have a conversation around what that might look like. And also there are plenty of opportunities to partner with Lever for Change. So if there are if you're looking for organizations to fund in the refugee space, if you are looking for, organizations to fund in any kind of other spaces, we have organizations in our network that are working across health, education, crisis settings, climate change, etc. So if you're interested in funding anything and you're looking for organizations, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to share information that we have and help you source and find new organizations. We also put some materials on about Ahlan Simsim, as well as Lever for Change and Lego Foundation, in the drive, or the access for you guys to access through the portal for this conference. So please do feel free to reach out to us. And thank you all very much for coming today, and good afternoon and good evening. And we hope you all have a very wonderful weekend.
Well done.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think that was smooth.